Those are kind of the additional resources that you download the slides. They're primarily links to additional storytelling information, resources, WordPress-related tools that are kind of relevant to the things I'll be talking through. So I encourage you to download the slides. There's a lot of additional information in there. Did any of you notice last night when you were walking over to the party at the Safe House, John Hawk's Pub, located on Wisconsin Avenue and the river? Back when I was in college, I'd gone out with a couple of classmates to John Hawk's, and as the local person, I was always the one that got asked all the Milwaukee-related questions, like, hey, why are all the bridges across the Milwaukee River crooked? Things like that. So we were sitting in John Hawk's, and somebody said, oh, very cool, they've got the English flag hanging up because it's an English pub. And I said, well, you know, it's not just an English pub. That's not the reason for the flag. The reason that the flag is up, and I went and explained in very, probably for them, excruciating detail, how at the end of the 1812 war, you know, the original settlement was the general signing of a broad treaty of, hey, we're going to stop killing each other. And then it goes to, like, I like to call them the guys in the back room, who then write out all of the incredibly intricate, detailed stuff. And they screwed up with some of their latitude, longitude, or whatever they were using in those days. And there's 1 acre on the edge of the Milwaukee River there, where currently the 100 East building, where John Hawk's Pub is located, that actually belongs to the United Kingdom. So I told them this story, and everybody was like, you just know the strangest, obscure stuff. Well, they were a little disappointed and somewhat pissed when they then found out that the whole thing was something I literally just kind of spun off the top of my head as I was sitting there in the bar talking to them. So I have a reputation for storytelling. And I'm going to hope to be able to share a little bit of a more factual basis with you today to get you enthused about telling stories online and hopefully using WordPress as a very powerful tool for being able to tell your stories. So who am I? From a storytelling perspective, obviously other than kind of tormenting friends and family, I also have a little bit of background. I've done some short stories over the years that have been published. First one was actually back in the mid-'80s in a literary journal. Last one was part of an anthology last fall. I serve as a webmaster for a local storytelling organization's website. And finally, over the last couple of years, I've written a couple of what are called ARGs, alternate reality games, which is one of the examples that we'll just touch on of ways that people are storytelling online these days. In terms of WordPress experience, I've been working with the web since the early days. I was one of those geeky people that tried to build up an HTML website back in the mid-'90s. I actually started playing around with WordPress back in the early days. I don't know how many of you have a memory of it, but when WordPress had one theme called Kubrick, and that was it. For a number of years, I served as the lead for digital development at a Milwaukee advertising agency. And then for about the last year, I've been in charge of web development at the Orion Group in Sussex. And I always like to caution people, you can tell this from my slides as we go through, but that's my original website on the left, that's my current website on the right. I am not a designer. Sometimes I'm barely a developer. So please be tolerant. I've got lots of text that probably is like, oh my God, when you look at the slides. But so we'll take a quick look today at just a history of storytelling and a history of storytelling since the online world has begun. And you can actually spend a pretty significant portion of the talk today talking about the Aesop Story Engine. It's named for Aesop from Aesop Fables fame. It's a plugin for WordPress that's been out for, I believe, just less than a year now. Very powerful. We'll actually do an online demo just to look at some of the things that that can do. Also talk about some themes that have been geared specifically for storytelling and the ways that those can be used. There are a ton of them. We'll just take a look at kind of a couple of the more popular ones, and then open it up to Q&A. And of course, as I mentioned, there's a big section of resources, which I won't touch on at the end of the presentation as well. When I started working on this presentation a couple weeks ago, it was kind of funny because I was pulling together some basic information for my slides, tried to decided to take a break and was looking at some information from San Diego Comic-Con. And the first thing that came up was this story about, hey, Joss Whedon just declared that storytelling is ingrained into all of our genetic codes. So he was apparently giving a speech. For those of you who don't know, he's the one who created TV series Firefly, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and has been involved with a couple of the Avengers movies. So he is a storyteller, through and through. And as he was talking to one of the con groups, he said, "Yeah, it's one of our primary instincts." In terms of how we're defining storytelling for storytelling online, I guess I look at it in a pretty broad sense. A lot of people will be very traditional and say, "Okay, we're just talking about fiction." These days, storytelling. The definition of storytelling and the word storytelling can cover a lot of ground. A lot of you have probably heard in the business world, people refer to storytelling these days. How are you getting across your brand? That's your story. So it isn't just fiction anymore, and especially in terms of what can be done online. So this is a definition that I pulled off of one of the online dictionaries. That everybody has kind of their own take on it, but it's pretty much a broad definition that we're going to use for today's talk. Storytelling has been around, as long as human culture and human society has been. The earliest cave paintings date back, I think it's something like 14,000 years. So that's the first kind of documented evidence that we have of storytelling. It was people were sharing stories of the hunt. Oral storytelling started, probably around the same point where people would actually convey things one-to-one or, one to very small groups and talk about what had happened or, lessons of wisdom or whatever it might be, and those were passed on. For these thousands of additional years, I guess the one big point was storytelling was a very slow process, and it went from person to person or small groups to small groups. Then with the invention of the printing press, that was the first kind of mass communication attempt, or mass communication channel, where storytelling suddenly had the ability to spread very quickly. One person could write something, gets run off on the printing press, and suddenly thousands, tens of thousands, however many people were able to read these stories that previously were, either exchanged through oral tradition or through, somebody handwriting something and passing it from person to person. Aesop's Fables, which dates to, I guess, about 400 or 500 BC, is considered to be one of the first printed, hand-printed examples of stories that were passed on. That's kind of interesting because that ties into where the name of the plugin that we're going to talk a bit about today comes from. And then, of course, there's William Shakespeare, who kind of pushed everything into a giant new realm, was incredibly prolific, publishing just dozens and dozens of plays and hundreds of sonnets that, up through today, continue to be published and circulated everywhere. Since the dawn of the digital world and the birth of the internet and the World Wide Web, this has all taken on an even greater expansive reach. Storytelling now, by publishing, what was traditionally maybe just the words that were in a printed book, you put those on the web, the reach is multiplied well beyond what it was even for books that were being sold or placed in libraries or whatever. As I mentioned, in the business world today, storytelling is considered to be part of how they operate. Steve Jobs pretty much made a career, or made the end of his career, on telling the story of just one more thing. And everything that was traditionally happening before the advent of the web and before the advent of digital media are things that are now done through that media. So the same things are still there, but now with online media, there's an ability to build so much more onto that. What's happening with the digital world is you've got an ability to, despite the fact that you are sending out stories to very, very large numbers of people, you can again be interactive almost like you used to be in the days when things were one-on-one. Things can be customized for specific audiences or sometimes even for specific people. There's also an ability to be very dynamic. When you're reading something in a book or you're looking at a photo on a printed piece of paper, there's only so much that can happen. It's a static thing. But online, there's an ability to create things that are continually changing, continually being updated, very, very dynamic and relevant to the user and what they're seeing. The couple of examples I've got there, by the way, kind of bookends of the two ends of where we've been and where we're at. This one's an old Lufthansa site from, I think, like 1985 or 1995. So they were trying to tell their story in a very technologically limited way online in those days. And then, of course, today, one of the big hot things is infographics. And infographics tell a story if they're done well. They take you through different pieces of data, show you how those pieces of data link together and bring you to an endpoint or hopefully a successful and satisfying conclusion at the end. As I mentioned, there are a lot of things that existed before online channels that, in terms of storytelling, now have just been translated online. We had television and movies for decades before the World Wide Web came up, but now we see video online. We had text for centuries and centuries. Now we can read it right online. There are a lot of other things, though, that have developed and emerged since the online world came up. Infographics, which I just mentioned. Another, which all of you are, I suspect, probably familiar with it, even if you don't realize this, what's called long-form storytelling. These are the sorts of things where people will have a very detailed, in-depth look at a particular topic or subject. I mean, sometimes we're talking about 10,000 words or more that can be read on a website. And those will get into great detail, and it allows you, because of the fact that it's on the web, you can do a lot of things in addition to just simply writing 10,000 words. And we'll have a couple of examples that I'll pull up in a second for that. The ability to do things in an animated fashion. Again, animation obviously existed before the World Wide Web, but there's an ability now to do so much more with the web and to push those kind of to the next level in terms of being able to convey information. And then there are a couple of things that are a little unique in that they didn't really exist in any way, shape, or form before. And that's the alternate reality gaming, which I mentioned that I've done a little bit with, and transmedia storytelling. What's interesting about those is that they take multiple channels and they pull them all together. So it's not just that you're reading an article online. You might read the article online and then go follow a character or a person from the article on Twitter and get additional information that feeds back to that article. There might be videos posted out on YouTube that are relevant and also give you additional information. And in order to really get the full experience, you're looking at multiple channels. Some of them, particularly in the case of alternate reality games, will actually have real-world components where there will be something at a physical location that you need to go and look at or read or interact with in order to get the full piece of the experience. One example of that is something that was called the Lizzie Bennett's Diary. This is, I think, about 2 years old now. What this was an attempt to retell Pride and Prejudice in an online, real-time, real-world sort of fashion. So what the folks who created this, they took and they had the main character recording a video diary, and she was posting every couple days a new update. So the story and the plot line was very similar to the original Victorian Jane Austen novel, but was updated to be taking place in the 21st century. In addition, all the characters who she was talking about in her video diaries had their own Twitter feeds and Facebook accounts, so you could actually go out, not only follow these people, but interact with them. So if you were familiar with the novel, you could start to ask them questions. You know, what do you think of so-and-so? You know, are you interested in them romantically? You know, what were you doing last night? That sort of stuff. It ended up being very popular, and a lot of people were directly involved with the experience. So something that was once traditionally just sit down and read a book suddenly became this very interactive community experience with hundreds of people being involved in the story. Another one of the things I mentioned was the idea of long-form storytelling. One of the examples that came out in the last couple of months, which I suspect just because we're interested in WordPress and web development that you may have seen, was there was an article called What is Code that was published out on Bloomberg.com. It was written by a writer-developer who periodically writes for them. This was a very large piece. It was, I believe, over 13,000 words that he wrote. But one of the very nice things that he did was he had literally every couple of paragraphs throughout those 13,000 words, either an animation that would help to illustrate a particular way that something operated, whether it was a technology or the way that code logic worked or whatever. The example I've got here, I believe, was dealing with gateways and how a circuitry can be changed on the basis of whether you're turning on or off certain points. So you could go through this and experience things real time and not just read about it, but actually see how the things he was describing worked. It got kind of a mixed review, especially out in the developer community. But I think for folks in particular that didn't know that much about code or development, it was at least something that had the ability to get them interested in learning more. Another example, and this is something like the Lizzie Bennett's diary, except this is something that's becoming much more popular in the marketing of TV and movies these days, is the idea of using digital storytelling to expand the universe of your stories. I mean, it's literally sometimes like, it seems like every movie that's coming out, you can go to the website for the fictional company that's in the movie. You can follow the Twitter account of the main character in the movie. So this is becoming a pretty standard way of marketing films and TV shows and sometimes books and things as well. In the case of Sherlock, the original BBC version, when they launched the TV series over in England, the two main things that they started were Dr. Watson had a blog that he was updating on a regular basis at the same time that the episodes were airing. So you could go watch the episode and then read the blog and read about his kind of internal dialogue and thoughts about what you might have just seen in the TV series. There was also a website that was called The Science of Deduction, I believe, which was in the universe of the TV show being written by Sherlock himself. So again, it's becoming a very standard practice in a way for places to market or companies to market their shows and their films by expanding the universe, creating a way for people who are really interested, who are real fans, to find out additional information about the story, about the characters, and the like. So after all of those examples, why WordPress? I mean, what are the things that make WordPress kind of a good fit if you're doing these sorts of things? Well, the classic one, and I think I've used this line in every time I've ever presented on WordPress anywhere, is cost. WordPress is open source. The base software is free, so there's not a giant content management system investment that you're making up front. The community and the support are another big factor. There are so many people involved in WordPress these days that you can get assistance with just about any questions or any issues that you come across. The fact that it's scalable, where I've seen this firsthand is with alternate reality gaming. In a lot of those games, they will be spinning up 10, 15 websites, sometimes within a period of a week, to build out these fictional universes. If you're working on WordPress, that's very easy to do. The more difficult part, of course, is sometimes coming up with content for those 10 or 15 websites. But actually getting the websites up and running because you're using WordPress makes it very easy. The usability factors, so for the folks who are actually working on these projects, they've, in many cases, worked with WordPress before. If they haven't, the back end is very easy to learn, very easy to become comfortable with. Of course, WordPress is very SEO friendly out of the box, and there are some very easy things you can do in terms of basic plugins to make it even more so. WordPress is very accessibility friendly. There have been a couple of talks about that this weekend. There's been some things that are initially built in, and there are a lot more things that you can do very easily in terms of either updates on the back end or some things that can be done with themes and that. The other thing is when you're spinning 15 websites, You don't want to necessarily build 15 custom themes. It's very easy to work with WordPress to either use variations on a theme, set it up as a multi-site sort of approach, or even use out-of-the-box themes. So it's something that, again, can save you a lot of time when you've got to do a lot of work very quickly. And finally, the plugins to do just about anything that you could ever want to do with storytelling are already out there in most cases. One of the plugins that we're going to talk about in a second, of course, is the Aesop plugin, which lets you do some really incredible things in terms of being able to bring storytelling online. So this is kind of a natural breaking point before we actually go into looking at the back end of some of these things and some of the actual tools. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts at this point? Okay, we'll move on. So for the next step, we're going to look at the Aesop Story Engine. As I mentioned, this is something that's relatively new for WordPress. There are bits and pieces of what are in Aesop that actually existed before, either as freestanding plugins or as parts of themes. But the Aesop Story Engine has pulled a lot of things together and made it very easy to use all of them, whether it's in a single post, a single story post, or in multiple posts within a website. These are a couple of the key things that are in the Story Engine. Some of the ones that I'll be showing you real-world examples of these, but some of the ones that I really love are, there's a timelining example. What you can do is, if you're telling a story that has a chronological narrative, you can actually anchor different points in your story to points on a timeline. The timeline then, depending on how you set up your theme, can be anchored someplace. So, for example, anchored to the bottom of the screen. And then as your reader moves through and looks or reads different content, the timeline will actually tell them where they are in the chronological story. There's a similar one with maps that Aesop has built in, which, if you're doing something that's more geographic and somebody's following a journey through a city or something, you can actually use map functionality where you can pinpoint the different points in the story. And again, as someone is traveling through, reading the content, looking at the photos, they'll actually be able to see with an anchored map or a map that can be made to pop up very easily where they are in the story from a geographic sense. Now, in addition to the components that the Aesop Story Engine has, there are a couple of other things that make it a very powerful plugin. One is that there's a built-in quick starter guide. So if you're someone that hasn't really done a lot of development, or maybe you just played around a little bit with themes and plugins in the past, it can get you going very easily. There's also a developer's guide that if you are a developer and you want to build a theme that can utilize the Story Engine right away, they tell you exactly what you need to do. It's built to be very integrated into themes. And the folks who have built the Story Engine have also built a number of themes that are out of the box already set up to be functional with the plugin. The downside is some of them are on the expensive side. A couple of examples that I screen captured here are over $100. The good news, though, is that if you do know a little bit about development, it's relatively easy to take your own theme, and using that developer's tool guide, you can actually make the plugin work with your theme relatively easily, and that doesn't cost you that much. So at this point, and hopefully this will work, jump out to a demo site that I've been playing around with. And this is the back end of a site. I've got 2 posts in it right now. And I'm going to flip back and forth to kind of give you the sense of what the front end and the back end of a story look like. So last weekend, we were in, my wife and I were in Boston and did the Freedom Trail on Saturday. It took about 8 hours and walked the entire length, took tons of photographs and everything. I thought, this is a great something. I can see how easy it'll be to just throw it up, tell the story of our journey, and show how it can be easily done using WordPress and using the Aesop Story plugin. So I created this post. The first thing is, this initial opening is actually something that I built into the theme that I set up for this. This is not part of Aesop. The headers here, where you see Boston Common, Freedom Trail Visitor Center, that is an anchor for a chronological timeline. And if you see along the bottom here, we've got the timeline that I referred to earlier. So that's one of the components. So what happens is as you scroll through and you hit each of these new points, the timeline will actually update down here. Should update. There we go. To show you where you are at in terms of the time of the story. Jumping back to the back end, let me show you what that looks like. So when you have the plugin installed, and you can actually download it from the WordPress.org plugins repository. When you have the plugin installed and your theme is compatible, either you've bought one of the pre-existing ones or you've coded your own theme to work with it. What you'll see is a button up here that says Add Component. And it's just like adding any other media or inserting anything else into your content area. You just go to where you want your component to be inserted, place your cursor there and click this button. You'll see there are already a couple of things that have been inserted here. Timeline stop is one of the links that shows an H2 header and then links to that timeline that displays on the bottom. This is what that looks like on the back end. Whenever you go to insert a component, you get this overall story engine where you first select what kind of component you want to insert, and then on the basis of what the component is, it will actually give you different options that you can select. So in the case of the timeline stop, it's pretty straightforward. All you're doing is setting up the title, and it links in automatically then to the main timeline, which I have set up at the end of the story. Here's another one. This is a document component. So what this does is you can set up documents so that they show up as links within the story. So here's one right here. What this is this is actually a map that was provided by the U.S. Park Service. I didn't want to embed the map because it would take up too much space in this particular flow that I was working on here. But by setting it up as a component, what you do is essentially put it there, then it can be expanded out and displayed.
You have some image that goes into the media manager? Or?
Yes, everything that Aesop uses, it saves out to your media library, so you can actually reuse these things elsewhere. The other thing that's really nice, and when I started playing around with this initially, I guess I didn't realize how much I'd get addicted to it, is it's not just for posts. So when I was going in and I was setting up the page, what is this site and why am I creating this for WordCamp? I was like, I can throw a component in here and I can do a quick parallax photo without having to actually code anything. So it was, it's something that when you have it installed, you can pretty much use it wherever you want on your site. So again, in terms of this document, this is a very simple one that all you do is you have you say what kind of document it is, and you have it linked to where it is out in your media library. And then if you want to put the caption, that actually becomes the link. That's what you type in there.
Amazing.
The ones that I have been using a lot in this demo site are the parallax ones. This is essentially just a simple parallax setup.
Kevin, can you define what that means, parallax?
In the case of, I think in the case of the broad definition, and again, I'm not a designer, what you have is you have different layers in your page that are moving at different rates. So you can have things that are overlaying that seem to be going past at different speeds. It creates an illusion of movement.
Okay.
Very similar to if you think of the way that parallax was traditionally defined, where you would be looking at the horizon and you would see things closer to you moving in greater distances than things farther away. So let me open up one of the parallax ones here. So what you see on parallax when you're placing parallax on the page is, again, you have a basic photo that's treated as your background image. You load that from your media library. You can then configure the rate at which it moves. You can overlay a caption on it. It lets you adjust where you want the caption position. You can turn on a light box, so if someone actually clicks on that, it will pop up as a full-size photo in a light box on top of your site. One other thing that this particular parallax component does is lets you put essentially a floater element on top of the parallax. So if you wanted to have a second photo on top or something that was semi-transparent, you could do that. Again, you can set where that appears in terms of the background image and how it moves or how it operates. And then the end result are essentially photos like this. So you get that little sense of movement as you scroll down. This is just a regular embedded photo, but this full screen one is parallax, so there's a little bit of movement in there. And this is linked from the presentation. It's also, the URL is tomorrowsage.com, so tomorrowsage, all one word. If you want to actually go out. Right now it's just the demo website for this. One other thing, and you can play around with the styles quite a bit, but the way I did it when I built this theme to work with the Story Engine was I actually set up so that all of these components are going to always be full screen, but then have a content area, which is, if I scroll back, where I've got my text here that's set to a very specific percentage width and has a maximum width, things like that on it. So we've also got, I just did a traditional photo in here, so you can do things like that as well, just like you would in any other WordPress page or post. You can do a video embed as a component. You can also do audio. Let me just show you, because video, again, it's really easy and straightforward. So what you're doing with videos, you're essentially identifying where it's coming from. Is it from Vimeo or YouTube or wherever it might be? And then there's that 20-digit or whatever ID that the video host service typically assigns to it that you just put in the video ID field. The rest of it then is just configuration in terms of what percentage of width do you want it to be? Do you want there to be a caption overlay and things like that? So again, it's very quick and easy to put these components together and throw them into a story.
So did you video yourself in any of this?
No, it actually, that video that I had up there for the Park Street Church is just one I found on YouTube.
Okay.
Which is, the pictures, all the other pictures in here we actually took while we were doing the walk, but I wasn't able to get any good ones at Park Street because we walked right around the corner underneath it.
Were you using your smartphone camera?
This is all iPhone photography, actually, yes. So I was kind of impressed. I should say that whenever I take photographs on the iPhone and I'm a lousy photographer, I'm always impressed because the iPhone makes it look good. So it's, again, it's very easy to use the different components in there. Any questions as I've been going through this?
The theme that you're using here, is that a Aesop theme?
It's a custom theme. What I did was I started with an underscores theme and actually built in some basic styling and then used the information that's provided in the developer's toolkit that they have out on the website. It's really easy. The thing I liked about going that route was I was able to control all of the styling of the components myself, so I could decide what I wanted to display in what ways and things like that.
So a custom starting with underscore.
Right. Yeah. But again, you can, they have a couple of themes that you can purchase from them. There is, and when we get to the themes in a second, there is one free theme that I'm aware of out there. There may be more. They're already set up to already work with Aesop. So yes.
Are we seeing a single post with multiple timeline insertions or a sequence of posts? And is a sequence of posts possible?
A sequence of posts is possible. There are a couple of things that are in there. Let me just. There are chapter points, which actually allows you to essentially create posts as chapters and then link them together. And I feel like there was one. Oh, collections is another one, where you could actually assemble things as like groupings. I have not personally used either of those. The chapter ones is very intriguing, though. I'm going to think at some point try to play around with that. Yes?
My daughter has a blog that she has a book that she's written on, so it has chapters per posts. But mixed in are posts about Pokemon and Zelda. Is it possible to mix those, to have one part of the site be her story with the chapters in line, and also have her blog about video games?
I suspect that would be pretty easy to do, either using categories or something like that. Again, I haven't tried this, but just playing around with the tool, it's pretty customizable, and I suspect that the power is there to do that if you needed to, or if you wanted to. Yeah. Yes.
Have you found it easy to theme for? Like, you said you do custom themes or add custom
and again, I like to say I'm barely a developer.
Right.
But it was easy enough to do. I guess I would say it didn't make it any more difficult than building any other custom theme. Let's put it that way. The code that you need to insert is very well explained out on the website for the Aesop Story Engine. They talk about what different things do, so you can decide what you do and don't want to put into your theme. You can actually choose, if you want to just have certain components if you're building a custom theme. The components will be there in the story engine, but your theme would only utilize certain ones. So it's also customizable in that way if you're building a custom theme as well.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So if you look at that post in the text editor, you're seeing shortcodes inserted.
Right. Here, let me jump back to that. Oh, sorry. So what you see are these blocks for each of the components when you look at it in the visual layout. But if you go on the back end, what you're seeing are essentially these little, and I realize that's really tiny, these little Aesop shortcodes that have been set up. And each one is keyed for the type of component that it is. And you can see it's, depending on what the variables are, they're all passed in that shortcode then. So again, it's pretty straightforward. Any other questions before I move on? We're starting to get a little short on time, so I'm going to jump back in and touch quickly on some of the other items on the slides. Longform is the one free theme that I'm aware of that already has the code set in to enable the Aesop Story Engine right out of the box. If you Google Longform WordPress theme, you're actually not going to get this one. There's another one out there that's apparently much more popular with the same name. But for all the themes that I've mentioned in the presentation here, I've got your download and demo links, so you can find those pretty easily. It's nice because if you don't want to go through the effort of developing and you don't want to spend $120 or $150 on a premium theme, this works right out of the box. It's mobile friendly. I believe it's Retina friendly. I might check my bullets.
What's Retina?
What's that?
What is Retina friendly?
What that means is that for certain Apple devices, when it loads the images, it actually loads an image that's twice as big. So if you have an image that's 500 pixels, it's going to load the 1,000 pixel version and then compress it down to a 500 pixel space, which is why if you look at an iPad or an iPhone, the images look so sharp.
Okay.
So it's, again, if you're looking for something that's relatively easy to start playing around quickly and trying out the story engine, this would be a good option. A couple of other themes, and again, there are a ton of storytelling-oriented themes out there, but these are a couple of ones that I wanted to present just because they're relatively good in terms of the functionality and how they've been set up. Storyteller was actually set up by a journalist. What this does is it sets up your story or your post to be very similar to a slideshow. So you see the arrow over there to click to the right. Makes it a very continuous, sort of easy to navigate sort of narrative. And again, these sorts of most of these themes these days are responsive, so they're mobile friendly right off the install. A lot of them are Retina ready. like most themes out there, you can do, in most cases, a pretty substantial amount of customization in terms of, setting colors and fonts and things like that. The other two that I've got here then are just a little bit more examples of, I guess, the ones that there are literally dozens and dozens of. So in the case of Radcliffe, this is something that was designed to really be almost like a photo blog. So it treats the photos very front and center. Everything is presented, if you go with the basic theme settings, everything's presented in a full screen format. And the other thing is, these themes that are designed for storytelling, I mean, they really kind of play up those elements of having very easy to read fonts, so the typography is something that works very easily. They want the user to have an experience that's going to be positive if they're going through a lot of content. I just got bounced out. Editor is one other example of that. Editor is actually very focused on the typography. They try and make it as friendly as possible for the reader. So it's a sort of site where when you're looking at it, you kind of forget that you're looking at anything other than text and photos. And again, each of these I've provided links for both download and for demos. So with that all said, let's go ahead and jump on to other questions that you might have. Have any of you done any sorts of attempts at storytelling online?
Yeah, I've used Story AM.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it's a hosted Aesop Story Engine site that you can go on and put your stories on, and it lets you kind of manage them. It's underneath it's using the Aesop, which is kind of
okay.
nice.
And what's your experience been?
It gives you a lot of different ways. Like the timeline one, like if you had something that was like a day, you're telling the story of a day, like the story was fine. It's great. I like you have like the picture headers for like that chapter and stuff. It's got a lot of new features. I haven't used it, but for about 2 or 3 things. But I see like maybe 3 or 4 other components.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you want to do something, use the rest of them.
Yeah, there's so much in there, and that's kind of been. And again, I haven't been using it that long. But it's one of those things where you just want to play around with it. It's like, that looks cool, I want to try that. Other questions? Yes?
Beck, I'm intrigued by your photo process again, because it's very visual. So, did you dump in your iPhone photos straight up right into the to the story without any Photoshop work, et cetera, et cetera? You just put in the...
I did. The only thing that I did, it's not really even photo processing wide, is in the theme. I have a couple of standard sizes that it resizes the photo to when I upload to Media Library. But I didn't do anything to adjust lighting or color or anything. No.
Because they look really good on my retina, right?
Yeah, it's the cameras and phones today are just incredible. Yeah, I'm always amazed. Yeah. Other questions?
So Kevin, you said the plugin. So that's get that from WordPress. That's in the repository.
Yes, if you go to the WordPress.org plugin repository, it's Aesop Story Engine. Okay. And I think on the very first slide about Aesop, there was a link to the actual plugin download page. So, other questions? Yes.
And it's not necessarily limited to like a certain post type or content type. It's like you could just use this as a really great addition to the WYSIWYG.
Yes.
Like
yes.
It's not locked into a certain. It's just there as a component.
Yeah. What it does is it adds a substantial amount of additional functionality. So you could do that. And after I've started playing around with this, have been tempted. I want to at some point go back and install it on my personal site and make my own personal theme compatible with it, just so I can leverage some of these tools on occasion. And by the way, I have nothing official to do with this plugin. I just stumbled across it. I've met a couple of people in the last few days actually that know who the developer is, but I'm just a user at this point, a happy user. Yes?
As for other WordPress storytelling initiatives, there is it's a plugin, but it's really kind of more of a distribution called Pressbooks. I have an associate who's used that for some publishers, and what that does, it allows you to actually create a book in WordPress that can be published online or exported as an EPUB for an ebook or a PDF for a print book. So it's a digital first book writing system, and some publishers use it to actually share the books online. That could be free, or it could be with you could add membership to that. And there are several publishers in Minnesota where I'm from where they're using it as their internal publishing engine for a digital first process.
Interesting.
So that's Pressbooks.
That's called Pressbooks.
One word.
Yeah, and it's not just a plugin you add to a WordPress site. It is, consider it a distribution where it basically turns WordPress into a publishing engine. But it still can produce a website that publishes books, and it uses multi-site, so each book is a site, and a post is a chapter. So it's you don't just add it to your blog. It's for publishing projects.
Does the EPUB part of it work?
Yes, that's the easy part. EPUB's easy. The hard part is PDF because you need a license to be able to convert to PDF. Even though PDF is ISO standard, it's still got some patent and tricky stuff that's hard to do. But EPUB is an open standard, so that's very easy to output an EPUB from. And I believe it does work with EPUB 2 or 3.
The hosted version, they watermark it once you pay.
Yeah, you can do a hosted version with them, or you can install your own. But it's something where you really, if you're an author and you want to be self-publishing, you could look at this as a way to do something a little more advanced than just uploading your book to Kindle or Smashwords, and they don't do that.
Or even small publishers don't have the bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, well, small publishers, it's a gift to say, oh, WordPress is now my publishing engine. That's so cool.
I heard it was developed by textbook publishers.
Well, actually, it was an independent guy who had formerly done an open source audio project, and then he developed it with some university publishers in beta, and then rolled it out 2-3 years ago as a open source WordPress plugin. But it is an advanced multi-site setup. You can't just turn it on. Or you can host with it. So it's it is a freemium solution.
Other questions?
Just one, yeah, designer. What did you do for fonts? Okay, you threw this together quite quickly, but your fonts are really nice. Where are you calling your fonts?
I'm a Google Fonts person.
Okay.
I use them. I believe so.
It's really nice.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Other questions? Oh, yes.
Will your demo website also be uploaded or just your slides?
It's up.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't have the link for that demo site
It's in
on
the
here, but
Milwaukee
it's in the
WordCamp.
slides.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's also in the description for this section. That's true. It's tomorrowstage.com. And right now there's just 2 posts that I've played around with, but between the 2, I get probably at least 50% of the components that the Story Engine offers. So you can get a sense of what they look like and how some of them operate. Other questions? Well, I hope you're all kind of encouraged to maybe take a look at this and see what you might be able to do in terms of doing some storytelling online and get creative out there. Thank you.
Thank you.